Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. May I have attention, please? All quiet, please. Thank you. So, yeah, we're going to record this so I can get this up. It always takes a while to upload it. And only once so far I actually stopped during a class and said, no, we can't do this. This is not going very well. Too many interruptions. It was not a 10th grade class. It was another class. Yeah, I'm like, whatever, dude. Seriously. All right, so here we go. Take your notes out. Have your notes out. We're going to be continuing looking at government. Yes? Government. Yes, it's about government. Okay? What's that? Oh, I'm sorry. Well, it's going to get good from here on out in here, okay? I will do everything I can to help improve it and get it into a positive way. Trust me, I'm going to try, Trey. Oh, okay. All right. Well, in here, just write it all down, whatever I say, blah, 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 and that will really help you. As we get ready, probably, I'm thinking like, let me see, you guys are in here on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of next week? Yeah, we're going to have like a small test on this unit, so we're going to be I know, it's a small unit. I told you. This is not like one of my units of last year. Yeah, but it's like a 20-point test. Yes, JT, that is a very important thing. And I drive across bridges and so forth. So think of them in positive terms. So it's going to be okay. You ready? We're going to, it's not like, the ninth graders are like, yeah, let's do the Black Death game. I know, it is fun. And so it's like, I think it's fun enough, and they enjoy doing that. They wanted to keep, like, pulling cards and so forth until they were all gone. Okay? All right. You ready? Okay. Here we go. You ready? So, where we left off, we were looking at major types of government. We actually didn't we get started on that? I think we did. Okay? Totalitarian dictator. Who is the totalitarian dictator? Ah, Arnold Schwarzenegger. No, Arnold Schwarzenegger did hold political office. Anybody know that? He did. Where? California. He was the governor. He says, I rule. Yeah, he used to tell his constituents, I will be back. Yeah, no, I mean, he was the governor, elected. He was originally from Austria, but yeah, he's not a totalitarian. There was somebody else who was from Austria who did turn out to be a totalitarian dictator. Anybody know who was from Austria who turned out to be a totalitarian dictator of another country? It was Hitler, yeah. Hitler. I mean, they speak, you're like, do they speak Austrian in Austria? No. And do you know what they speak in Austria? German, yeah. They speak German. Did that go off? No, it's still going. Is that yours? Oh, that was yours. I thought it was my camera. Turn off your sound effects. Okay. Yeah. I had a student once who had his little phone thing and we would do reviews, and he had a little sound effect that went like with the cymbals and the drum. Yes. Absolutely. You can always use your phone for taking notes, and if those of you guys who are taking notes on the internet and so forth, you can handwrite, and then you can transfer them. Oh, life. Oh! Or you can, take the notes, watch me again. So it'd be like, do. Hook up your computer, take the notes while you're watching. I mean, yeah, it's only 45 minutes or less. All right, in fact, it's like 40 minutes because we've already started. Okay, so here we go. You guys ready? Trey?
Give them the big...
Pull your hood back. You're paying attention now. Oh, no, calm down. We don't need the enforcer here, okay? Yeah. You obviously have a lot of fun doing that, okay? Perhaps too much. Yes, we need to see, yeah, okay. It's like, I like hitting my hand. Okay, that's okay. Yeah. So, let's talk about autocratic forms of government, okay? Right? Let's get back to it. Autocratic forms of government. Let's get a recap on what we know, and then we're going to be able to move into the other ones. All right, so, for example, Scott, in an autocracy, who rules, one or many? Very good, one. Okay? No, that's right. Jana, who makes the laws? Who carries out the laws? Who are hired by the government. All right, so is there a boss in carrying out the laws? Yes. Who interprets the laws? Yeah, the ruler. So we got one ruler to rule them all. And he's got a ring. I don't know, Lord of the Rings and kind of thing like that. Any of you guys into that? No? Okay, never mind, whatever. Yeah, I mean, it's like they're all wearing the ring, and it's like they get sucked in to under the control. Actually, ask an interesting question. Who would have been the Lord of the Ring over all of the people and all of the various different ones? What was the name of that character? Do you know that? Go for it. Yeah, very good. Sauron. What happened to him by the end of the story? What happened to the ring of power? Yeah, he sacrificed a digit, and then where did the ring end up? Exactly. In what mountain? You guys are doomed if you can't remember. Mount Doom. In what territory? You guys are like, oh my gosh, what a nerd. He's so into Tolkien and whatever. One does not simply walk into a Tolkien reference. Mordor. They go into Mordor. One ring to unite them all. It's an autocracy. It's a really twisted autocracy. But Frodo, little guy with big hairy feet, ends up being one who will destroy Sauron. Okay, fine, whatever. Let's look at this. Now, between these two, all right, because this is important, we're looking at the two major types of autocracy. We've got absolute monarchy, which is the old-fashioned model. We don't see that as much anymore. And then totalitarian dictatorship. We've seen that pop up at times over the last 100 years or so. Between those two, Vera, which of them is like a bigger stickler, has more control over like people's thoughts and minds, and maybe won't even let you practice your own religion? Autocracy is like the overall thing. Between which is going to be saying like, we don't want you to follow a particular religion ever, a monarch or a dictator? Dictator, yeah, you can write that down if you didn't write that down at all. And I don't know if I stressed that enough last time. The modern ones, they're sort of like, we really want to have control of your thoughts and minds and so forth. Sometimes in history, an absolute monarch would go, look, you need to follow my rules, not always on religion, but sometimes they would find it was a little easier to just let the people follow what religion they wanted. But not always. It depended on the absolute monarchy. Okay? Which of them has greater use, Michael, of technology to keep track of the people? And actually, it's kind of answered this way. Which of them is around more in modern times where you can use technology to keep track of the people? Everyone together. Totalitarian dictator. If you just say dictator, that usually works, okay? Because most people, when they say that dictator Hitler or that dictator Stalin and so forth, we know what they're talking about. But totalitarian is a reference to that system is like total involved in the people's lives, and it really sucks for them. Yes?
So you said for this kind of being, for dictators, other forms of government, they send spies or listen on conversations, like in China. So if they do that, is it true? Because I saw this one video and it said things you should never Google, and among them are how to make a bomb or things like that, because it said the government will put you on this list of people to watch out for. Wait a minute, if they know that, then does that mean check all your history?
If you're in a totalitarian dictatorship, they're going to check everything that they want, and they will.
But what about with you?
Here, if they've already kind of got your number, like if you've been involved and you've had some arrests and so forth, they will have maybe increased surveillance on you. Because do you want a government to be aware of things that might be a domestic security challenge? Yes. Do you want them to completely invade your privacy at all times and all places and take away? No. So that's where you get, Trey, it's a good question because that's a very important question in this society. Where is the balancing point between protection of freedom, government stay out of my life, and providing some domestic security protection? And that's a tough one, okay? And so if you do Google, if you do searches and so forth and say, I'm looking for, if you do an advertisement saying, looking for ingredients to build my backyard nuclear weapon, the government's going to look into that, okay?
So they must monitor all the searches, though.
That's a good question. That's a
I
good
have
question.
another
Let me have this question, and then I'll follow up another one for
I
you.
have an answer to what he just
Okay,
said.
go for it.
So last year, Google, they got fined for like maybe $12 billion or something like that. But they were taking stuff from like Alexa, or like Amazon Alexa, they were taking stuff from Facebook and selling it.
Yeah.
To, like, the
Yeah.
black market.
That's a very good point. I was going to say, because sometimes these things that private companies, because you're connected with them through communications and so forth, private companies, they have a lot of information. The government doesn't necessarily have access to it. I'll give you an example. I think it was like Apple phone. There was like somebody who committed a terrorist act in California, and they had like an Apple phone or something like that. And the police wanted to get the code to open it up so they could like see who the bad connections were and things like that. And Apple's like, no, we're not going to do that. That's private. That's between us and so there was a lot of controversy there. But Apple has access to it. And what you're talking about is that some of these companies, it's like, oh, sure, I'll sign that. That's fine. Click, 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 click. Right? Have you ever done that? Like on your yeah. I mean, people do it all the time. It's like some of them. Like one of the things is we can sell and provide this information to other people who are trying to find out what kind of a consumer you are and helpful information. So all of a sudden you do a search for tree saplings, and all of a sudden you get all these different ads popping up going, hey, would you like this? Hey, would you like that? And it's like, you're like, how did they know that? Did they read my mind? No, they read your searches.
Are you convinced that our phones connect spirits or something? Because this one time, my friend was talking about the blue light glasses, and then I just went on Instagram, and the first thing there was an ad for blue
From a
light glasses.
conversation. Do 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 do. I'm not going to argue that's. I'm not going to argue that's what there's at. All right, so needless to say, as I mentioned last time, people thought, oh my gosh, in the age of technology, it's going to be a lot easier to stay clear of the government. Not necessarily, or corporations and so forth. All right, so that's autocracy, a lot of control. But remember, keep in mind, if an autocrat doesn't provide national security, domestic security, economic, social satisfaction, what could potentially happen to that autocrat? What? Answer the question, then I'll answer your question. Yeah, it could be a revolution, it could be overthrown. Now, in an autocracy, we know this. I mean, write it down if you haven't already. I think I made this point. Is freedom like their number one priority? Not so much. And certainly not things like political freedom to vote someone in and out of office. Sometimes autocrats will have elections, but they're like fake elections. We'll see that when we get to the Soviet Union. You go to jail if you don't vote. And guess what's on the ballot? One choice. Yeah, it's like one choice. So that way the government can say afterwards, they love me. They have voted me in again, 100%. You're like, really? Is that how it works? No, we have a fair competitive election.
I don't remember what it was.
Shh. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't remember what it was, but last year during one class, we were talking about how there was like this guy, I think it was in like Europe, and like he was part of like this war going on, and he's like, something like he has to be elected, or like he won't be unelected because he won't allow it and stuff like that.
That sounds like an autocrat. Without knowing any more about the specific of who that is, that's an autocracy. Fake elections. Yeah. The elections, there's really no choice. In our election for our president, there really is a choice. People can vote for Donald Trump, or they can vote for Joe Biden or anybody else that's on the ballot. Probably it's going to be Donald Trump or Joe Biden. It's an election. No, Trey. Yes.
So what I meant by my friend was, isn't that what's happening in Russia, right?
Yeah, we're going to talk about Russia throughout their history, and Russia today is kind of reverted to form, which is autocratic, yeah. Autocratic, one ruler. Even if they don't have a communist system in place, autocratic. Okay? Quickly, and then we'll go to the next thing. Noble rule, or oligarchy. Second category is oligarchy. Go ahead. What's your question?
So, you were saying how we were going to, so, is Russia becoming worse than
Let's take the time to look at Russia and its history and kind of where it's at and so forth before we draw conclusions. Then I might come back to the question of what is Russia's governmental system today? Okay? And I would say, maybe not as bad as North Korea. North Korea is always fascinating because here we go. North Korea, I think we tapped onto this a little bit. I don't know if I showed you this slide. North Korea is like, it's kind of this weird like monarchy kind of totalitarian dictatorship. In other totalitarian dictatorships and so forth, it doesn't necessarily pass within the family, but in North Korea it does. But that is one of the worst totalitarian dictatorships in the world. Very repressive of people's freedom. Very repressive. The only people that are guaranteed to kind of like, I don't know, be fed on a regular basis and have some kind of a benefit and positive life system are people in the military. I mean, if you're going to run a totalitarian dictatorship, you need to make sure that your military is well taken care of. And your police. Because those are the ones that are helping to maintain your authority. Okay? Question?
I thought that, like, they underfed their soldiers and they got only, like, 260 potatoes a day.
Don't do that to your soldiers. You don't do that to your soldiers because soldiers have guns. And if you tell the soldiers with the guns to do things and the soldiers are loyal to you, they may do those. If they're not loyal to you because you're not taking care of them, and let's see, they're economically dissatisfied because they're like not eating well, watch out. We'll see this in history. If you don't take care of your soldiers may turn against you.
They're like, it's all rebel.
Well, because they're being taken care of in North Korea, yeah. Go ahead, and then I'm going to keep going. That's an interesting point to, probably the one, I'll answer it a different way. Probably the one that is not as grounded in sort of the whole world, maybe the most recent one, because he was raised entirely in his life with the expectation that he was going to be the dictator, and now he's the dictator. And he lived in that country with the adulation for him and his parents and so forth. The first one, he wasn't the dictator. He didn't become the dictator until he was a, fairly young man and so forth. And so that's an interesting question. I mean, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on who's the worst dictator in North Korea. Things aren't great for any of them there. Perhaps things are especially bad for the people, maybe under the current one. But it wasn't much better under the previous one either. Quickly. Yeah, he did. And actually, there's some expectation that perhaps, I don't know, he may be missing, then he popped up again, and then maybe now he's missing again. And so, like, who's in charge? Maybe his sister. I don't know. I don't know if he even has kids. If he does, there's like little baby kids. They're very, very young. But his sister is actually a very important person within that, as opposed to like his brothers who died mysterious deaths because like when he came to power and so forth, they were sort of like inconvenient. I think one of them died in an airport from like getting stabbed with some like, poison thing. Nasty. Nasty. All right. Oligarchy. Write this down. Here we go. Oligarchy. Oligarchy, simple definition. Few people rule. A handful of people rule. You got that? Several people rule. It's not democracy. Democracy is a lot of people ruling. It's not autocracy. That's one person ruling. Oligarchy is several people ruling. Okay? Make sense? All right, let me tell you some other things about it. It's got a lot of similarities to autocracy. A lot of similarities. Who makes the rules? Several people. Who carries out the rules? Several people and the people who work under them, like their military and their police. Who interprets them? Several, right. The people at the top. Okay, so you got a small group of people with elite. Now, this might not surprise you too much. Sometimes you go kind of between an autocracy and an oligarchy. It kind of goes back and forth a little bit. So, for example, let's say there's several people who are very powerful, but then one rises above them. So it goes from an oligarchy to an autocracy. Does that make sense? Okay. Or maybe the one ruler dies off in an autocracy, and then who takes over? Maybe a committee, maybe a group of people afterwards. That kind of make sense? Because maybe there's not one person that clearly has the support and authority to rule by themselves. So you see, there is a lot of similarities between the two, and sometimes you see in history places where it kind of goes back and forth between autocracy and oligarchy. Yeah?
What would happen if, like, for example, we have 4 in all of this.
You only have one king. There's only one king.
If you have a group in all of this,
Okay.
like, someone wants to leave,
Like leave the country? Oh, lead that group. Well, then there might... Oh, they want to retire peacefully? They might be able to get away with it. I mean, it doesn't happen that often in history. They might be able to. They have to be careful, though, because if they have enemies that are now, like, not afraid of retaliation, you know. Usually, like, in history, like, if you look over the last 100 years and you get an autocrat that gets overthrown, they want to get out of the country. They want to go to a safe place. Because if they're in that country, it might be payback time. I mean, the new rulers might say, hey, we're going to get some justice, and we're going to haul you into court, and we're going to make you pay for those crimes that you did against the people while you were ruling. Does that make sense? Sometimes those people don't make it out of the country. You're going to see, actually, in this unit that we're coming up, there was a communist dictator in Romania. And he tried to keep absolute total control over the people, and the people were rebelling. Oh, and guess who came on their side? The military came on that side. He was done. He did not get out of the country. He was lined up and executed. This is a guy called Nicolae Ceausescu. You'll get to know. He'll be specifically identified in a later thing. So, yeah, I mean, if you're the dictator, sometimes it's in your best health interest to remain dictator until you're dead. Because if you don't, then they might come and get you. All right? Let's look. We've got kind of like with the other one, autocracy, we've got the old-fashioned one, absolute monarchy, and then you got the new totalitarian dictatorship. In this one, the old-fashioned one is noble rule. Write that down. Nobles. All right, noble. Anybody know any good titles of nobles? What are some good noble titles? You know any? Peasant is not a noble. Okay? So I'll give you a clue. Write this down. The nobles in the old system and so forth, they had land. You know, they had nice houses that was built on the land. The peasants worked for them. What? No, priest would be like a position within a church. Although sometimes, you know, if you were a bishop, it's almost like a noble kind of within a church. You're kind of higher up and so forth. You got one? You're thinking, yes? King is royal. Absolute monarchs could be called kings. How about this one? Duke? Duke is a noble title. Write that down. The Duke. So you got the king, and then you might have the sort of the next layer of important people among the nobles, dukes. Earls, duke and duchess. Female is duchess. Earl, baron, baronet. The marquis. A marquis is a noble title, yes? In Japan, you would have various different titles and so forth and so forth. A shogun would be almost like a royal title, although in fact, I'm sorry, the shogun is not the emperor. The emperor is the emperor, but in Italy, not to confuse things, but in Japan at the time, the shogun had most of the military power. Sorry, I digress. All right, so you got, yes? Yes, and had the real power in Japan at that time. Okay, so nobles have their noble titles. Now think of it this way. Actually, maybe some of you know. What's the name of the royal monarch in England? Queen Elizabeth II. All right, and her husband actually is not a king. His name is Philip, and he's called Prince Philip. Her sons are princes, but they also have titles as well. Okay, the oldest son, Charles, is Prince of Wales. Sometimes you get like these titles, you know, Earl and Duke and so forth. So, and they're cousins, and we got nobles and so forth all over the place. Here's the gist. Here's the gist. Okay? In history, the nobles are very important, and sometimes the nobles support the king, and the king gets support from the nobles. Sometimes they fight, and if the nobles knock off the king, a lot of times, then among the nobles, next in line, one of those nobles becomes the new king. Yeah. Sometimes, like for example in Britain, you had a king, and they really have to share a lot of power with the nobles. Sometimes they're like, we just don't want a king. We're going to rule amongst ourselves. Got that? So power is shared in a noble class, an elite class. Got it? Who makes the rules? Who carries out the rules? Who interprets the rules? The nobles. That's not too hard to follow. Okay, so don't do that, please. Seriously? A lot of times, the peasants actually are quite loyal if they're being treated very well and so forth. Okay? Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes you get, like, for example, in England, there was a time where there was, like, it wasn't clear who was the king, and the nobles all fought amongst each other. Write this down. Sometimes, if the nobles are all fighting amongst each other, people are like, that's a lot of domestic insecurity. Maybe it's best if we have one strong ruler. Sometimes, if the nobles are all fighting against each other, outside threats are coming in. Poland, for much of their history, no strong king. What happened to Poland eventually in history? It got disappeared. Powerful countries around it were like, wow, you look weak. We're going to take you. I mean, it was sad. And I mean, you look historically, you're like, maybe if you had a strong king, you could have better organization, national security, and so forth, at least a chance. Okay? So that's the deal about nobles. That's the deal about that system. Are nobles very powerful today? No, put this down. Nobles are like not powerful at all. In fact, even in Britain, I mean, at least they've got a monarch that still has a title. The nobles there have maybe got their houses, but a lot of them can't even necessarily always afford their houses. They might have the title, or maybe some American will come along and go, I'd like to have a noble title and a house, and I can afford it. And they like buy up these noble titles and houses and things like that and so forth. It's like, whoa. Because, I mean, where is the wealth today? Is it in agricultural land? I mean, yeah, a little bit, but not as much as the old things. Now today, if you're wealthy, you've got a business, right? You know? You're like Elon Musk. If Elon Musk has a bunch of land, that's because he bought it. That's not because he became wealthy from that. Okay? Does that make sense? All right, now, the modern comparison to like a oligarchy, I call it totalitarian dictatorship by group. Okay? By group. It looks and feels very much like a totalitarian dictatorship by an individual, but it's a group. And I have the Chinese system right up here as an example. I point over to the wall. When China first became a dictatorship, they had had an autocracy through much of their history, an emperor, absolute monarch. And then eventually, you know, they had a communist government, but they had a dictator, Mao Zedong. He was the absolute ruler of that country for until, you know, from 1949 until he died in 1976. Mao Zedong. Yeah, usually when you're referring to him, you refer to him as Mao. It's like, it's Mao Zedong, M-A-O, and then Z-E-D-O-N-G. Okay? So when he died, there was somebody who could rise up from the ranks of the top communist officials. Deng Xiaoping, he's the guy on the far right. He was the guy who introduced, I think I may have mentioned this to you before, he introduced capitalism into the Chinese system, which really worked out well economically, and China became wealthy. And so he was the man who a lot of them looked to as the leader. After he died, write this down then. So in China, after he died, you see kind of rule by the top leaders of the Chinese Communist Party. For quite a while there, I mean, somebody might have the top position, but it's not like they had absolute authority. You know what I'm saying? They decided to kind of share power quite a bit. There was no one person that sort of was dynamic enough and insisted upon and got the loyalty of everybody else. That's where you get kind of like totalitarian dictatorship by group. What is it like to live in a totalitarian dictatorship? I've already described that. I mean, if you're somebody who objects to the government, you're gonna think, oh, let's buy a group. I've got a better chance to get my point across. No.
So basically, say like one of them has like a big idea, you would have to share it with the other people.
Yes.
And they all have to agree.
Yes. Very good point. Okay. Now, it's interesting because right now, the number one leader is Xi. The top most important leader is Xi. Xi is pronounced Xi. And he's been the top leader of China for some time. I think it's probably fair to say that Xi, the leader of China, sees himself as more like not just one of a group, although he has to be careful not to go too far out on that, but more like Mao, the top leader of China. Now, Mao could say, hey, I'm the leader because I got us here. I got us to the People's Republic of China. He's the original founder of the country, Communist China. He rose up through the ranks of communist officials to get to that top position. So, interesting question. Is China now a totalitarian dictatorship by one or a group? I'd say group, but it's leaning a little bit more recently to one. I wouldn't say it's a clear answer, but it's definitely a totalitarian dictatorship. So for the average person in the world looking around at that and say, yeah, that's what it is.
So like with most dictators, they look like rule or like giving whatever.
Not necessarily.
But he just looks like nice.
Well, here's the deal. Do you have to look threatening in order to be able to carry out?
Yeah.
No, you don't. Be nice. Shh. No, I mean, look at this. I mean, you ever noticed somebody who was just like calm? They had a calm voice. They smiled. They looked at you, and you felt a shudder of fear and terror going through your spine. Okay, okay, calm down. So, JT, keep it inside your little head, okay, please. I mean, the point is, you understand, right? They don't have to be all like raging to like, for you to know they got the power. Do you understand? Okay, yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of like how a totalitarian dictator would be. All right, questions about totalitarian dictatorship by a group. Sometimes, write this down, it's like a military group. It's like in some countries, you might have like a group of top generals gain control, and they're looking at each other like, all right, we threw out the other guys. How's this going to shake out? So sometimes you have a group of generals, and sometimes just like one of them rises up above. But, you know, when you're looking at it, it's like, well, what's the difference for the average person between a modern totalitarian dictatorship by group or individual or military dictatorship? Okay? Now let's get to democracy. Yay, I like democracy. Democracy comes in all shapes and sizes and forms and so forth, and it's really quite interesting. Is America's democracy just like, say, Britain? We both definitely have democracy. Write this down. Democracy is the people rule. Rule of the many. And even people who don't necessarily get a chance to vote in that democracy, like you guys, you still have the right to participate, speak your mind, communicate. Okay? Even if there's people who aren't citizens of that country, who are adults, they still have the opportunity to speak their mind, try to persuade those who are voting. Right? Once upon a time, just over 100 years ago, over half the population of the United States couldn't vote on the basis of XX chromosome. Gender, exactly. Yeah, and so people would go, oh, you don't need to vote. Men will take care of that for you. They will represent your interests. Just like, you know, today, adults will say, oh, you don't need to vote. You're still maturing enough and you're still figuring things out. Adults will take care of that today. Are you okay with the adults that will take care of that? How many guys are okay with men can take care of the interests of women? Trey is on camera, on record. I'm a male chauvinist. No. Okay. It's like, yeah, how many of you guys are like, take the vote away from women in the United States of America? I think so. How many of you guys are like, take the vote away from men in the United States of America? How many of you guys are like, take the vote away from Trey in the United States of America? No, okay, no. All right, so anyway, but the people rule, yes. So black men could vote legally, although if you're paying close attention to the last unit, last quarter, black men had the right to vote in the Deep South for like maybe a decade before it got shut down. It meant a lot initially. I mean, there were black men who were getting elected to Congress and positions of great authority, but then by, say, the mid-late 1870s, it got shut down. And whites that didn't want blacks to vote, they were in charge again. And they used terrorism and other means to keep blacks from voting. Yeah, which is why you guys are going to learn this year, second semester, about the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King Jr. and others in the 1950s and 60s who fought very hard through our constitutional means to get these things changed. Yes? Depends on the rules of the state. It depends on the rules of the state. And some, yes, and some, no. Typically, it depends on what their position is. Generally, like for example in Idaho, I can answer this: you're out of jail, you've finished your sentence, you're no longer doing any of the punishment. You can go to the court and get your voting rights back in Idaho and many other states. Some states are more restrictive. Depends on the state.
If you like, if you go into some little charge, you can, but unless if you're charged with an actual felony, you can't.
It depends on the state. It literally depends on the state. My daughter did her a major research paper on the laws in Kentucky, looking at what are the rules as far as people who committed a crime being able to vote again. Kentucky's very restrictive. And it would almost be like, hey, man, if you messed up anywhere along the line, forget it. You can't vote. Idaho and many other states are much more forgiving. You do the punishment, then you get your voting rights back. Because you're not mature enough. That's the quick answer. I mean, that's the quick answer. So when do you become mature enough? Well, it used to be 21. Then they changed, you'll see it in the Constitution, 26th Amendment. They changed it to 18. And that was really controversial because some people said, you're not mature enough by 18. How many guys are going to be mature enough to vote at 18? How many guys are mature enough right now to vote? I mean, how many guys know people that are much older and they're just really not mature enough and you're just as soon? Yeah. So like my dad, when he was in politics and so forth, he voted for the 26th Amendment, right? Because the argument was you're old enough at 18 to enter into a contract, to serve in the military, to die for your country. You ought to be able to vote for the people who are going to send you into battle. Kind of made sense to me. So 18 is that's the magic moment. You wake up on your 18th birthday, everyone always says this, I feel so much smarter. I don't know, maybe you do. I don't know. You wake up on the day after your 21st birthday. Some people are like, oh, ow, just kidding. Some of you guys are like, I get that. All right, so democracy. Here we go. The people rule. Put it down. The people have sovereign power. Ooh, that's a nice word. Let's get you that term. You ready? Sovereign? Sovereign. The authority. Sovereign. I-G-N. Sovereign. That is, the people have the authority to choose the leaders in government, to make the decisions. Who makes the laws? The people, or their elected representatives. Who carries out the laws? The government, who is responsible to the people. Who interprets the laws? The government, which is still responsible to the people. Okay? But there's all kinds of interesting things that are going on there. All right? Usually there are limits as to who can participate. Make sure you write that down. Usually it's age, citizenship. Those are probably the two biggest ones. Most countries don't allow non-citizens to vote in their elections if they've got a democracy. Okay? Let's see. Constitutional monarchy. Make sure you put this in there. A constitutional monarchy, like they have in Britain, and like they have in places like the Netherlands and Sweden and Japan and Denmark, the people rule. They vote in their elected officials, but they still got a monarch. So what does the monarch do? The monarch waves. The monarch is the embodiment of the country. And if the monarch is popular, they should do things to remain popular. They should sort of stay out of the political debates and things like that. They should just be like, I'm for the people. Queen Elizabeth II for Britain, very popular among the people. And her parents were too, particularly her dad. When Britain was at war with Germany and London was being bombed, Buckingham Palace in London as well, where did the king and queen go? Did they go to Narnia? Did they go to some outside place? Actually, do you know The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? Some of you guys are familiar with that, right? Yeah, those kids, the Pevensey kids, were in, they were getting away from the city which was being bombed. Elizabeth, as a little girl, was in London that was being bombed. And so the people are like, you're with us. You're one of us, right? You're not hightailing it off to some safe zone. We appreciate that, okay? So, the constitutional monarchy, what is limiting the power of the monarch? The answer is in the phrase, a constitution, okay? Britain, like the United States, has a constitution. Theirs is not necessarily all written down in one piece of paper like ours is, but they have a constitution, all right? And it's been developed over time. Write that down. A typical constitutional monarchy kind of gets developed over time. So if you were to go back, even back to the American Revolution, remember we covered that last year? Remember who the king was in Britain? Close. One off.
Oh, the third.
The third, yes. Very good. King George III, it was like people in America are like, we're against King George III. Even though at that time, the Parliament, the representative government, had most of the authority. King George III still had a fair amount. He was still important. It's gotten even less over time. But they haven't gotten rid of the monarchy. They still like him. Why don't they just get rid of him? Actually, here's one reason. Economically, it makes sense. If you're Britain, how many of you guys would be like, I hope COVID goes away so I can go to Britain someday and like go to Buckingham Palace and watch the changing of the guard for the Queen and things like that? Wouldn't that be cool? I mean, how many of you guys follow like the English monarchy? Do you? Really? You don't? You don't? So, you don't know who this guy is right here? Who's this guy holding the kid? You guys don't. Obviously, the Americans aren't caring as much about it. So, here's the Queen. There is the heir to the throne, Prince Charles. That's not his first wife. That's his second wife, Camilla. His first wife was Prince Diana. And what happened to Prince Diana? They got divorced. And then she was being chased by a bunch of paparazzi in Paris, and they smashed, and she died, leaving her two sons, William, you're all off, William and Harry, as like without a mama. And so we all felt very, very, very bad. But eventually, William got married to Kate, and they got 3 kids now.
Wait, what? I thought Harry was married back then.
Harry is also married. Where is Harry? That's Prince Philip. Yeah, that's Prince Philip. That is the husband. Yeah, that's the husband of Elizabeth. He's older than her. He's very old. They were in Canada. Who did Harry marry? Meghan. Where's Meghan from? America. Yeah. Was that controversial at all? I don't know. I mean, she was really cool. I watched the wedding. It was pretty cool. I mean, it was nice and everything like that and so forth. Do they have any kids? Yeah. Is Harry happy with how everything's going back in Britain? No, he went to Canada. Now he's in California. And I think they made a deal with like Netflix or somebody to like do a script on like what their life is and so forth. Drama. I mean, yeah. I mean, Elizabeth's dad wasn't even supposed to be king. Elizabeth's uncle was supposed to be king, but he married an American. Isn't that always what happens? That messes everything up. He married an American who was divorced, and the British population was like, oh, we can't have that. We cannot have that. We cannot have that. We can't have a divorce, an American even. So they forced him to resign, and so Elizabeth's dad became the king, even though, if you've seen the King's Speech, it was not a job he really liked to do because he had a very, very difficult challenge with speech and stuttering. Okay, and he actually used to smoke like a chimney in order to kind of calm his nerves. So if you ever watched the movie King's Speech, very, very cool. Because he got some help, some therapy, some training, and he was able to give, with some success, speeches. It was awesome. And that was Elizabeth's mom. There's a reason why she's been on the throne so long. Her dad died fairly young, as apart from all that smoking that he did to try and calm his nerves when he was trying to be king. His brother was supposed to be king, but his brother married an American. No, they didn't get divorced. They went off to like France or someplace like that.
So if she's married to that dude, then why isn't like he ruling her? She's like the prince because
She is the monarch who inherited the throne. Philip married her. It's interesting. In England, if you're the king and you marry somebody, they call her the queen. If you're the queen, you're the monarch, and you marry somebody, they call him a prince. Whatever.
but like how come like that little boy in the blue? How come they call him a prince and he's like 5 generations away?
Because he's a prince. He's a prince. He's a prince. Okay? So we'll do some more on direct, indirect democracy and so forth next time. We may be coming close to wrapping it up.